How did you come to include Corky Evans in your book?
Well, when I decided to write the book, I knew that I wanted to have people's stories, because I told my own story in Heart Matters, and people enjoyed that story, and I think everybody has their own story. Everybody writes their own novel of their life. Everybody has the chance to narrate their life. And so I knew about 5 of the people in this book tangentially. I mean, I knew Naheed, and we weren't friends, but I knew him. Fred Bild was a friend, a child of the Holocaust, who became a very prominent ambassador for Canada. And John Tran I knew because he'd done a film on me as the cinematographer. Kevin McMahon was the director, but he was the cinematographer. And then when I came to doing Draft Dodgers and Resistors and Deserters, I wanted to focus on Nelson, BC, because 35 years ago, I went to Nelson for the first time, and I always remember it because the water was all brown, although they wouldn't admit that now. When I went back last year, I said, the first time you came here, the water was all brown, and you were having a terrible trouble with your water. And I said, no, I don't think so, but I remember it. Anyway, and at the time, I was told that there was a greater concentration of draft dodgers in that Slocan Valley and the Kootenays than in any other place in Canada. So I thought, well, that's interesting. I made a few more inquiries, and the name Corky Evans came up. And I had vaguely heard of it because he ran for the leadership of the NDP a couple of times, and I knew he'd been a cabinet minister, so I called him, and he was very Corky Evans. So we were in touch, and then I went to the Slocan Valley, and then I met him and talked with him. And I realized that he, in a way, summed up almost a stereotype of the draft dodger from the California type area, was in riots and demonstrations. Hell no, we won't go, that kind of message of the time. My other draft person was Andy Barry, who was a very, very respected, noted, and beloved broadcaster in Eastern Canada. First of all in Montreal for a number of years, and then
he was the Rick Clough of Toronto.
Yes, he was for 15 years the morning person, yeah, and has retired now. And I always thought he was a draft dodger, and it wasn't until we sat down and talked, and we'd had coffee many times and were friendly, that I realized he was a deserter. So that story was interesting. So then I had Andy as a deserter and Corky as a draft dodger. And then Corky led me into meeting the whole group of people who live still in the area of the Slocan Valley. The mayor of New Denver, Gary Wright, who lives in a house that was one of the houses of the interned Japanese Canadians in what's called the Orchard of New Denver. And he introduced me to a whole group of other people who had been draft dodgers and deserters, all of whom still live in the area. And then the whole area was interesting to me because that's where the Doukhobors had first settled. And I had a very great interest in the Doukhobors when I was a child because the Sons of Freedom sect, they had a split.
Yeah,
and
those were the more radical ones.
They were the radical ones. The Doukhobors
they
basically
took their clothes off.
The Sons of Freedom took their clothes off, and it marked me as a small child. I was 9, and it was the first time I saw a middle-aged woman with no clothes on. Was in a newsreel of the Sons of Freedom burning their own houses, and an RCMP officer turned the other way. And it marked me. You know, these things mark you as a child. And I always wondered what it was and how. And then I knew that their children had been taken away because they refused their children going to public school. Well, it turns out that their children were put in a residential school in New Denver, which had been the TB sanatorium for the interned Japanese Canadians. So if that isn't a Canadian palimpsest, what is? You know, we have this.
Well, they have the camp in New Denver too.
That's right,
yeah.
and that's where I went because I wanted to see that, and also because David Suzuki says in his autobiography Metamorphosis that the Doukhobors had been very kind to the Japanese Canadians and had given them fresh produce and things like that. And the Doukhobors had been very kind to the draft dodgers because they thought they were pacifists like them. And in fact, you know, the draft resistors indeed did not want to serve in the Vietnam War, but I don't think they were probably all pacifists. They just didn't believe that war was an appropriate one, and they didn't want to serve in it.